I always thought our family reunions were rather special. They weren't opulent, but they had a certain warmth that I enjoyed. The warmth that comes from shared experiences, inside jokes, and years of memories weaved together like a soothing quilt. Our small house on the outskirts of town became the hub of these gatherings. It had a large backyard that extended into the woods, excellent for summer picnics and winter bonfires. My wife Sarah was the life of. During these meetings, she had a talent for making everyone feel welcome, often bustling around with a smile and laughter that might lighten any mood. My brother Mike and his wife Jessica frequently visited. Mike and I were close, as brothers usually are, and his marriage to Jessica made our families even closer. Jessica was quiet and restrained, perfectly matching Mike's extroverted nature. Mike and I had grown up in this exact house, a relic of our childhood packed with memories of skinned knees and sad hearts. Once our parents passed away, the house became mine. Sarah and I moved in right after. After our wedding, we spent years renovating it and turning it into our own little sanctuary. The dining room table where so many family conversations took place had seen numerous meals and even more. Last, it was at that table that we celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and the occasional spontaneous get-together. Life felt almost perfect. Sarah and I had been married for 10 years, our love increasing with each passing year. Our friends looked up to the pair who appeared to have it worked out, yet like any couple we had. Our ups and downs included disagreements over trivial topics, periods of quiet treatment, and a rare night spent. Despite being separated, we always found our way back to each other. Our house was a place of refuge, not only for us, but for anyone who went through its doors. Had a warmth that wrapped around you, a sense of belonging that made it difficult to leave. Sarah would spend hours in her kitchen, which had worn countertops and mismatched cabinets, creating dinners that filled the house with delicious aromas. Mike and Jessica frequently joined us, their laughter booming through the halls as we swapped tales and created new memories. Nevertheless, underneath the laughing and seemingly beautiful facade, cracks were beginning to develop, little at first and almost imperceptible, but they were there, and like any crack, if left ignored, they might develop and fracture. During one of these family reunions, I recognized something was the foundation of all we had established. It was a short moment, a look that lasted too long, a touch that felt more. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, but it felt more intimate than it should have. Once you notice something, it's hard to unsee it. Life continued on with its regular of daily life, lulling me into a false feeling of security. Sarah and I would wake up early, enjoy a cup of coffee, and talk, discussing our plans for the day. She worked at a neighborhood bakery, her days filled with the fragrance of fresh bread and pastries. I worked from home as a graphic designer, which gave me the freedom to be available in the evenings. We cooked supper together and talked about our day, but those cracks remained beneath the surface. Even though I wanted to dismiss them and pretend everything was okay, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was dreadfully wrong. It was a gnawing sensation, a recurring doubt that ate away at my peace of mind. Looking back, recognized that early indicators were the beginning of the end, the prelude to a betrayal that would destroy the heart core of my existence. Yet at the time, I was blissfully unconscious, living in a bubble of denial. Little did I realize that the shelter we had made, the life we had established, was about to come crashing down around me. The first time I felt the spark of doubt was a quiet evening at home. Sarah was in the kitchen alone. As she made supper, and Mike was around for one of his frequent visits, they were conversing pleasantly and easily. Banter that comes from years of familiarity, but there was something different in the air, a subtle shift. I couldn't exactly identify. It began innocently enough. Sarah laughed a touch too loudly at one of Mike's jokes. Sound that seemed forced, almost tense. I pushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but as the evening, there were stray glances and intervals of silence while the emotion lasted. Stretched just a little too long and a palpable strain I couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on the game on TV, but my mind kept straying back to them, the way Mike's fingers brushed over Sarah's arm and the short smiles they shared. A simple gesture seemed to have more weight than it should have, and I felt a pang of worry settle in my stomach. Brushed it away, persuading myself that I was imagining things as the weeks passed. Sarah began mentioning Mike more frequently, gently weaving in his name into our chats. She leaves to perform errands and returns much later than expected. Her justifications always hazy and hasty. I began noting how she'd dress up more when Mike was around, wearing the perfume I loved that I rarely used it, but one evening I couldn't wait anymore and brought. I'm trying to keep my tone light and conversational with Sarah, and you appear to be spending. I've spent a lot of time with Mike recently. Is everything okay? She looked up from her phone with a flicker of displeasure. Crossing her face here, my brother-in-law, Jen. Naturally, we spend time together. Don't be foolish, her reaction wounded. I felt a sense of remorse for bringing it up, but the nagging uncertainty festered in the back of my mind. I couldn't get the feeling that something was wrong, that the woman I had spent a decade with was slipping away from me. Trying to quell my concerns, I began monitoring their interaction more intently. I noted Sarah's face would brighten up when Mike walked in. She appeared more active. Mike, who was usually raucous, softened his tone around her. I kept my sight on her for a bit too long one afternoon when Sarah was away. I decided to take a closer look at her phone. My pulse hammered as I went through her messages, feeling dumb because invading her privacy. Most of the messages were routine, everyday interactions with friends and relatives. But then I discovered a thread of texts with Mike concealed behind an innocent contact name. I can't wait to see you tonight last. My hands shook as I read the letters, and a cold sense of fear washed over me. Over me, the words blurred together, a mix of treachery and anguish that I couldn't grasp. I felt like Sarah and Mike were drowning, gasping for air, as the reality of the situation struck them. My wife and brother, the two people I trusted the most in the world, conspired behind my back. The thought was painful, a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to face her and demand explanations, but I could not yet, since I needed to make sure that more than just a few texts accusing them of such a treachery. So I waited and observed, gathered bits of the puzzle, each building to the emerging image of their adultery. Sarah's late nights, Mike's regular visits, the way they appeared to draw toward each other, always finding excuses to. One night, as Sarah was in the shower, I found myself pulled to her laptop, which opened a window inside her private world. I hesitated for a second before opening her email. My heart fell as skimmed through the conversations, the secret messages that verified my worst concerns. They were arranging a trip together. Sarah had informed me that the weekend retreat was a work conference, but the betrayal left a gaping hole that I didn't know how to recover. I felt an anger building inside me, a yearning for retribution, for justice, but more than that, I felt a terrible feeling of loss for the woman I loved and the brother I trusted. Had both turned their backs on me, leaving me alone in the debris of our lives. I knew I needed to confront them, bring their lies into the light, but I also realized that I needed to be careful to prepare my following movements with precision. It wasn't just about my marriage or my relationship with my brother. It was about reclaiming my life and dignity, my sense of self. While I laid in bed that night, Sarah asleep beside me, I made a secret pledge to unearth the truth, no matter how unpleasant, and to make them both pay for what they had done. The storm was just beginning, and I was ready to confront it full on. The days following my discovery were a haze. My mind was filled with fury, perplexity, and a growing drive to unearth every element of their betrayal. I'm continually reviewing every interaction, every suspicious moment. I felt like a detective in my own life, putting together our clues to construct a complete picture of their infidelity. Sarah continued her farce, playing the role of a loyal wife while sneaking around behind my back. It was terrible, dance of deception, and I found myself becoming increasingly adept at identifying the signals. I observed her intently, observing. She'd race to her phone anytime a message came in, and she'd disappear for hours without explanation for each lie. She told each secret she maintained only increased my need to learn the truth. I began by checking her phone more frequently for any new texts or calls from Mike, and it wasn't long until late-night texts, romantic images, and plans for future rendezvous were all discovered to be hidden. In plain sight, it was a harsh confirmation of what I already knew, but it also gave me the proof I needed. Confront them, but I wanted more than just texts and emails. I needed something undeniable. They couldn't talk their way out, so I decided to follow Sarah. It was a desperate action, but it made me feel like a stalker, but I needed to witness it for myself. I needed to catch them in the act. One afternoon, Sarah remarked I was seeing a friend for lunch. I played casually, kissing her goodbye and wishing her a pleasant time. As soon as she went, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept a safe distance, my heart thumping as I trailed her automobile through. She drove to a tiny, fancy hotel on the outskirts of town. We'd never gone together, so I parked a few places away and watched as she exited her car, looking around uneasily. Before walking inside, I hesitated, grasping the steering wheel, my mind racing. A few minutes later, Mike's automobile came, and he got out, looking just as cautious as Sarah was. They greeted one another with a kiss, their bodies close together, their gestures personal. Seeing them stroll into the hotel hand in hand blurred. My vision with wrath suspecting and reading their words on a screen was one thing, but witnessing it was something else. Torment I felt an intense want to confront them right away, to break into the hotel and dismantle their universe. But I restrained myself, forced myself to keep calm. I needed a strategy once. They were inside, and I followed them into the hotel. The receptionist barely saw me as I strolled past my focus. Fixed on knowing their destination, I noticed them waiting for the elevator with their backs to me, fully ignorant of presence. I noted the floor number. They chose the 5th floor. After waiting a moment, I walked the stairs 2 at a time, my rage propelling me upward. I reached the 5th level and proceeded quietly down the hallway, listening for any noise that possibly indicate their position. I heard their voices from a room near the end of the corridor, muffled but unmistakable. Taking a deep breath to steady my shaking palms, I ventured closer. I needed to see it firsthand. I needed to capture them red-handed and confront them with indisputable proof of their betrayal. I chose a location just outside the room, hidden from view, but close enough to clearly hear their voices. I listened. Their talk was laced with laughing and murmured endearments, and it was a warped parody of love mocking. Sarah and I had built everything together, and my phone was in my grasp, capturing every word. A burst of pleasure came over me as I captured their personal chat, knowing that I was gathering ammunition. I waited for the confrontation, boiling with wrath, until I heard unmistakable sounds. Their affair was a knife in my heart, but it also completed the puzzle. Satisfied I had enough, I left the hotel as quietly as I had entered. The drive home was a blur, my head racing. Plans for what I would do next. I replayed the recording repeatedly, each syllable a reminder of their betrayal. Having a spark fueling my wrath, by the time I arrived home, I had a clear vision of how I would confront them. That evening, I acted as if nothing had happened and Sarah returned home. I pushed myself to reply to play my part in this horrible game by smiling and kissing me hello, but inside I was. While counting down the moments until I could confront her with the truth, I called Mike the next day. When I invited him over for a drink, he seemed shocked but agreed, probably feeling our tie was as strong as. He had no idea that this would be our last drink as brothers. When he came, I kept things. I offered him a beverage and made small talk, but as the evening proceeded, I couldn't hold my wrath any longer. I stared him in the eyes, my voice icy and calm, and questioned, "How long have you?" After sleeping with my wife. His face grew pale and his eyes widened in disbelief. Fumbled trying to refute it, but I stopped him off, pulling out my phone and playing the recording. The room filled with air. Mike sat stunned into stillness as he heard their laughter and the obvious sounds of their betrayal. The reality played out in front of him. Sarah walked in at that moment, her eyes widening as she saw the look on my face and the expression on Mike's. She realized quickly that the game was up. I turned to her, my voice quivering with wrath. "How could you, Sarah? How could you betray me like this?" She tried to utter her. Words were pouring over one another in a flurry of justifications and apologies, but I didn't want to hear it. Any more falsehoods. The meeting was harsh, a naked and unfiltered burst of anger and betrayal. I told them both just what I thought of them, laying bare my grief and wrath. Mike attempted to explain himself, but his cries fell on deaf ears. I urged him to leave and never come near me or my family again. Sarah, standing there, tears streamed down her cheeks, but I felt no pity. She had made her decision, and now she had to live with the implications. As Mike walked out, I faced Sarah, my voice frigid and firm. "Your stuff and leave. I can't stand to look at you right now. I need time to consider what comes next. You are not wanted here." She attempted to protest, but I was resolute. The lady I loved and the life we made were gone. What? As she packed her bags and went, I felt an unusual sense of betrayal. Thankfully, the storm had passed, and now it was time to rebuild. Of the confrontation, the home was unnaturally silent. Sarah had taken a few bags and left, and Mike was out of my life. I was alone in what was once a refuge, now a witness to betrayal and shattered trust. The weight of what had transpired sat heavy on my shoulders, a continual reminder of the life that had been ripped apart. I spent the following few days in a fog, going through the rituals of daily life without fully experiencing anything. Anger and grief simmered just underneath the surface, but I couldn't completely understand them. Instead, I focused on practical activities like changing the locks. When combing through proof of their affair, I needed to plan for the next steps to guarantee I kept my dignity and control. One evening, as I went through documents, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah asking if we could talk. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions a twisted jumble of fury, ache, and a flicker of something I couldn't describe, until I responded. I agreed to meet her the next day because I wanted to hear what she had to say before confronting her one last time. Decide on the future. We met at a modest cafe in town, a neutral ground where I intend to maintain my. Sarah arrived exhausted and anxious, with red eyes from sobbing. She sat across from me, her hands trembling as she took a sip of water. Seeing her so vulnerable and damaged provoked a perplexing mix of sentiments within me. John. Her voice became shaky. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to begin. I never meant for this to happen." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long, Sarah, have you been seeing Mike behind my back?" She looked down, tears flowing down her cheeks. "It began a few months ago. I was lonely, John. You were all always so busy, and Mike was there. He listened to me." I wanted her remarks to hurt deep, but I forced myself to be calm. "You believed betraying me with my own brother was the answer. I know it was terrible," she wailed. "I know I wounded you the worst way possible, but please, John, you have to understand that I did not plan this. It just occurred." I shook my head. "You didn't plan it. You went to hotels with me, lied to my face, and carried on a full-blown affair, and you expect me to believe it just happened. She leaned across the table, her hand quivering as she touched mine. I love you, John. I never stopped loving you. Yet I felt so detached. Losing Mike was a terrible, awful mistake, but I want to make things right. I want to try to mend this if you'll let me. I pulled my hand away, repulsed by her touch. Sarah, how do you propose we repair this? Destroyed our marriage, our family. How can we ever come back from that? She wailed harder, her tears reverberating in. I don't know, John, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, whatever I want. A chance to make things right? I leaned back, peering at her through a cloud of fury and hurt. What about Mike? What about the harm you've caused to my relationship with my own brother, Sarah? Shook her head. I've stopped things with Mike. I told him it was over. I couldn't see him anymore, he knows. What we did was terrible. The mention of Mike brought a fresh flood of rage through me. What about him makes you think? I'll never be able to forgive him, my own brother, Sarah. He betrayed me just as much as you did. She bowed her head. Picture of misery, I know, John. But please, can we at least attempt to find a way forward for the sake of what we had, for the sake of everything we've established together? I looked at her seriously. For the first time since the beginning of this nightmare, I looked at the lady I had loved, made a life with, was sitting in front of me, begging for another opportunity. A glimmer of my love for her buried beneath layers of hurt and betrayal. But I also felt a profound, unrelenting rage that refused to be ignored. I don't know, Sarah, I finally answered, my voice heavy with sorrow. I'm not sure whether I'll ever forgive you, but I need time to absorb everything to figure out what I want but can't make. Any promises? She nodded, a spark of hope in her eyes. I understand. I'll give. You have all the time you need. Just don't cut me off totally. Let me prove to you that I'm willing to change, that I'm willing to battle for us. I stood up, unable to bear the weight of her pleas any longer. We'll see, Sarah. We'll see. As I departed the cafe, the crisp evening air slapped my face in dramatic contrast. Despite the emotional intensity of the confrontation, I felt a mixture of relief and anguish, knowing that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but at least now I had a direction. I had confronted the reality. It was time to start finding out how to go forward. Days became weeks, and I immersed myself into work and routine, trying to keep the turmoil at bay. Sarah stayed with a friend, giving me the space I needed, whilst Mike was a ghost, made no effort to reach out or apologize, and I preferred it that way. The less I saw of him, the better. Sarah and I began counseling, a tentative step towards some type of resolution. The sessions were tough, requiring us to face with the deepest traumas and insecurities in our relationship. There were times when I wanted to walk away and abandon the process and start anew on my own, but something kept me going, a persistent hope. Perhaps we could salvage something from the wreckage. One evening, after a particularly hard session, Sarah asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room, the tension palpable between us. She stared at me, her eyes filled with guilt and a gleam of hope. John, I know. I've said this a million times, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I know it won't change anything, but I want you to understand how much I regret what I've done. I nodded, my own emotions a jumbled mess. No, Sarah, but words are just words. It's going to take a lot more than that to regain any type of trust. She gained out, gingerly grasping my hand. I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes for us to find. I squeezed her hand and felt a faint spark of what we once had. Sarah, it's going to be a long road, but I'm willing to try for now. As the weeks passed, we maintained our counseling sessions and gradually began to rebuild our lives. It was not easy. Every day was a battle, a struggle to overcome the grief and betrayal that loomed over us. But we gradually began to find moments of connection, glimmers of the love we once shared. It was a fragile ceasefire constructed on the unstable foundation of trust and forgiveness, but it was a start. As we took those cautious steps forward, I began to imagine a future where the grief of the past did not define us, where we could rebuild and move forward. Together, the road ahead was unknown, fraught with hurdles and concerns. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope, which was enough to keep me going. For now, as much as I tried to focus on mending and rebuilding, the fury simmered just beneath the surface. Every counseling session served as a continual reminder of the betrayal I had experienced. Attempting to rebuild our shattered relationship was contaminated by the thought of Mike and Sarah together. Shake off the need for revenge, the impulse to make them both pay for what they had done to me, Sarah's apologies and efforts. Making reparations were real, but they weren't enough to extinguish the fire of bitterness that raged within me. The counseling sessions helped us communicate, but they also brought up terrible memories and raw feelings that left me feeling more divided than ever. I was caught between the urge to rebuild and the necessity for. One night, as I lay awake in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. It was daring, even cruel, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction it promised. If Sarah and Mike felt they could betray me and walk away untouched, they were very incorrect. I would make sure they suffered the same misery. After the humiliation they had inflicted on me, the first move was to obtain more information to dig deeper into Mike's life and find a method to exploit his vulnerabilities. I knew Mike's wife, Jessica, was blissfully oblivious of the affair. She was a kind woman, committed to her family, and entirely unaware of her husband's infidelity. The idea of using her as a pawn in my plot made me feel a pang of guilt, but my need for revenge eclipsed it. I began by discreetly reaching out to Jessica under the pretext of brotherly concern, as we had always been friends, and it wasn't uncommon for us to talk about family matters. I played the role of support for brother-in-law, inquiring about her well-being and offering to help with anything she needed as we matured. Jessica confided in me about her connection with Mike, and I began to quietly explore for facts about it. Problems she and Mike were encountering, oblivious that I already knew the true reason behind their issues. She talked about how distant Mike had become, how he was often late getting home and appeared distracted when he was around. It was a great opening for me to sow seeds of doubt, to make her question Mike's fidelity while not raising suspicion about. As our chats became more personal, I began to share my own motives. I discussed my experiences, carefully building a story that echoed Jessica's concerns. Jessica listened to my concerns regarding Sarah's faithfulness and the possibility of her being unfaithful sympathetically, and I could see her mind working. The more I revealed, the more she opened up. It wasn't long before she began to feel Mike was hiding something. One evening, Jessica called me, her voice shaking with emotion. "John, I fear Mike is cheating on me. I found some messages on his phone, and he's been so mysterious lately. I don't know what to do." I appeared astonished and anxious, my pulse pumping with a mix of eagerness. "Dread Jessica, I'm sorry to hear that. Have you addressed him about it?" She murmured, her voice quivering. "I'm too scared. What if I'm wrong? What if it's all in my head?" She took a big breath. "Jessica, you deserve to know the truth. If you wish, I can help you uncover it. Out for sure. We can work together to collect the evidence you need." She paused for. After a time, John agreed that he needed to realize that he couldn't live like this. With Jessica on board, my plans began to take shape. I proposed that she put a tracking app on Mike's phone, one that would allow her to watch his movements and read his messages without his knowledge. She was initially wary, but her eagerness for answers overtook her qualms. So I helped her set up the app, and we waited for the following few weeks. Jessica and I worked together to acquire evidence of Mike's adultery. and the app provided us with a wealth of information. Mike's communications to Sarah were clear and scathing, documenting their encounter. This confirmed what we both knew. Meetings and hidden plans. Jessica was horrified, but her sadness only strengthened my desire to carry my plan through. The next stage was to deliver the facts to both Mike and Sarah in a way that left no space for denial. Justifications. I invited Jessica, Mike, and Sarah to a dinner at my house. Jessica was apprehensive under the cover of a family gathering, but I told her that it was vital to address both of them together to force them to confront the repercussions of their conduct on the night of the supper I cooked. Jessica arrived first, meticulously preparing everything for the showdown. Looking pale and apprehensive, I soothed her by reminding her that this was her chance to take control and demand the truth. Mike and Sarah came shortly after, both looking slightly nervous but clueless. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was strained and unpleasant. I played the polite host, keeping the conversation light and informal, but beneath the surface. As we finished the main course, the tension was tangible, like a storm about to break. I decided it was time to stand up and raise my glass for a toast to family. I stated, my voice firm, to honesty and trust. Mike. Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, realizing something was wrong. I laid my drink down and looked directly at. There is something we need to discuss, something Jessica and I have uncovered. Sarah's eyes widened in, while Mike's face became pale. Jessica took a deep breath and spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. I've been watching your phone, and I'm aware of the communications between you and Sarah, as well as the affair and the silence that. Mike stammered in an attempt to refute it, but Jessica stopped him off, bringing out her phone and showing. Sarah gazed at me, her eyes asking for mercy, but I felt nothing. This was their moment of reckoning, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook. I can't believe you would do this to me, Jessica replied, her voice breaking to both of us. How could you betray us like this? Mike was at a loss for words, his remorse and embarrassment clear on his face. Sarah attempted to speak, but I hushed her with a, "You both made your decisions," I added coldly, "and now you have to live with the consequences." The evening ended in mayhem, with Jessica storming out in tears and Mike chasing behind her anxiously, attempting to explain. Sarah sat there shell, startled and silent, the reality of her deeds finally settling in. I felt bleak. Jessica filed satisfaction, knowing that they would never be able to reverse the damage they had created in the aftermath. For divorce, and Mike moved out of their home despite our continuing counseling sessions. The trust between Sarah and me. Our marriage was permanently destroyed, and no amount of therapy or apologies could mend what had happened. I was crushed, but I took pleasure in having my revenge. I had revealed their lies and deception, forcing them to confront the repercussions of their actions, provided me a sense of calm and closure, allowing me to begin moving on the road ahead that was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had confronted the betrayal and exacted my revenge, and now it was time to begin rebuilding my life. The house was quieter than ever. Echoes of wrath, betrayal, and Sarah had moved on, taking only a few personal. Mike and Jessica were caught up in their own messy breakup, and I was finally left alone to sort through the debris of my life and find a route forward. The opening weeks were the most difficult ever. Ere I looked, Sarah and I had constructed a life together with our wedding photos, keepsakes from our adventures, and the small notes we used to leave for one another were all artifacts of a time that felt like a distant past, so I decided to pack. They hid the sad reminders in boxes in the attic as a symbolic act to make room for the new life I was resolved to make. I engaged myself in work, glad for my employment as a graphic designer helped me to channel my feelings into something practical, and I found relief. During the creative process, I took on extra assignments and stayed late at work to avoid returning to an empty home. Colleagues, unknowing of the difficulty in my personal life, lauded my concentration and attention one evening when I was working. Late, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. We hadn't communicated since the night of the confrontation, and I was astonished to see her name on my screen. "Hello, John. I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to thank you for your support. Really hard, but knowing I'm not alone has made a significant difference. If you're free sometime, maybe we could grab a coffee and catch up. I'd like to discuss." I stared at the message for a long time. Jessica, like me, was an innocent victim in all of this. We both had been blindsided by the ones we loved and trusted most. Perhaps meeting up would be a chance for each of us to find. "I would like some closure, Jessica. How about this? Saturday, we agreed to meet at a little cafe in town, the same one where I had addressed Sarah. It felt appropriate somehow. When I arrived, Jessica was already sitting at a corner table. She appeared fatigued, but her eyes brightened when she saw me, John. "It's lovely to see you," replied, rising up to hug me. "Thank you for coming. And of course, Jessica, it's lovely to see you too." We sat down and ordered. When the waiter left, Jessica took a big breath and glanced at me. "I don't know where to start," she remarked, her voice quivering slightly. "Everything is such a mess, and I feel like my entire life has fallen apart." "I know that feeling," I responded, nodding. "It's been a lot to comprehend, but we're going through it one step at a time." She smiled weakly. "Yeah, I suppose we are. I just wanted to thank you for being there for me. I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate it more than you know." We talked for hours about our experiences and offers. Each other's support was cathartic, a means of releasing the residual sorrow. Beginning to recover by the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter, as if a weight. Over the next 6 months, Jessica and I continued to encourage each other. We met often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for a walk in the park, or a simple supper. Our friendship deepened based on shared grief and a mutual desire to move forward. We had no romantic sentiments between us, simply a genuine relationship that helped us both heal. I also reunited with old friends whom I had drifted away from throughout my marriage, welcomed me back with open arms, offering support, and I began going out more and rediscovering interests and activities which I really needed to feel normal. Things I had long forgotten: trekking, photography, and even playing the guitar. Each new interest was a step towards reclaiming my identity. Therapy played a significant role in my healing journey. I discovered therapists who specialized in dealing with betrayal and loss, and our sessions were rigorous but extremely intense. Useful Dr. Green helped me negotiate the various emotions I was struggling with, helping me to understanding and acceptance. She pushed me to let go of the anger and resentment to focus on my own progress and well-being. As the months went, I noticed improvements in myself. I felt stronger and more resilient. The anguish of betrayal was still present, but it no longer defined me. I was moving ahead, constructing a new life on my own terms, and in doing so, I experienced a sense of calm that had eluded for so long. One lovely afternoon, I decided to take a trip in the woods nearby. My home was a trail I had frequently traveled with Sarah, but this time I went. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, and I felt a sense of serenity sweep over me as I got to the top of a hill. I halted to gather my breath and take in the view of the town stretched out below me. Patchwork of homes and streets, with the sun spreading a pleasant warmth over everything. It was a moment of clarity, a realization that life continues, that beauty and peace can still be discovered even after. In my darkest moments, I took a deep breath and felt the weight of the past lift away. I was prepared for whatever happened next, to accept the future with an open heart. The path was long and arduous, But I had come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever that evening as I sat on my porch. With a cup of tea, I thought of the people who had helped me along the way. Jessica, my friends, and my therapist had all helped me rebuild, and I wondered about Sarah, wondering where she was and what she was. I didn't hate her anymore, and I felt a feeling of closure, a realization that we both had made mistakes and were now on separate roads as the sun sank, casting a seeing the golden light over the horizon. I felt grateful that I had survived the storm, and now I was ready to live again, but the future was unknown. It was also full of potential, and for the first time in a long time I raised my cup in a silent toast to new beginnings and the courage and perseverance that had brought me through. Life was unexpected, but it was also a path of discovery and progress, and I was willing to accept it one step at a time.